one of the great filmmakers that we have in this country today, and I'm so glad he can be joining us at the Power of Film. Edgar Wright, ladies and gentlemen.
Hiya.
Hello, everybody. Is the mic on? Oh, great. Ed, we were just talking a minute ago about some of the films that had the biggest impact on you when you first started out. And I know that you draw from an eclectic range of, of ideas and genres when you create your movies. I was wondering what were the formative films that you watched when you were younger that made you think, hey, I can do this. I'd like to be a director someday.
Well, I think there are films that you see when you're a child that you're just enjoying them as entertainment, or maybe even when you're very young, you don't even understand exactly what you're watching. I saw, Star Wars was the first film I ever saw when I was 4 years old at the cinema. But I think when you're that age, you don't really understand what is happening, in a cinema. But I think it was later, I think when I started to understand that, and just get an awareness of different directors and their stamp, and started to, even at the age of 7, when Raiders of the Lost Ark came out, and it's this is made by the guy who did Close Encounters, and Han Solo from Star Wars is in this, so this is he is not Han Solo, he is an actor, but you start to just understand how films are made. So but then I remember when I was always interested in the arts and film, but not necessarily knowing, both me and my brother are sort of artistic, and our parents were both at various times art teachers, so they were always very encouraging of us. They were never those parents who, we had no connections within the industry at all, and I wasn't from a rich background, yeah. But at the same time, they never, if I sort of said, oh, I want to work in film, they never said, yes, sure, but also, why not think of something more practical? So that was a good thing, is my mum particularly would never, would kind of encourage us to be sort of ambitious, even though I had, no way of doing it. And then I think so there were periods when I was a kid, I knew I wanted to do something, and it's and both me and my brother were interested in makeup at certain points, and creature design, and comics, and drawing, and animation. And so there were all lots of things where those creative fields I understood because my parents are both artists. The thing of being a film director, when you're growing up, if you don't have access, this is before the internet where you could find out everything at the click of your fingers, you don't really necessarily know the genesis of different film directors. And especially Hollywood, it just seems like it is 1,000 miles away. So it was a bit later when I was a teenager when I started to kind of become aware of directors who, you have this thing where you sort of think when you're a kid that Steven Spielberg was born on the Universal Pictures lot. You don't imagine that actually, obviously there's now an entire film about it, about how he started. But one of the things that I started to get into genre a lot, and I really liked horror films and sci-fi films. And there were particular directors that I would really obsess about. John Carpenter, John Landis, Joe Dante, those directors where you could kind of watch their films and sort of, even as a 12-year-old, understand this is a John Landis film because of the typography on the credits. And this is a Joe Dante film because it always has Dick Miller in it. And, so you would start to sort of understand different directors by their different stylistic flourishes. And then when I was 14, we were just talking about this backstage, Jonathan Ross did this show on Channel 4 called The Incredibly Strange Film Show. And there's no film programs on network TV at the moment, I don't think. But at that time, you would have the mainstream ones, and then there was this show on Channel 4, 10:30 at night, which would have hour-long profiles on directors: George Romero, Jackie Chan, Russ Meyer. And then the one that really blew my head off was there was an hour on Sam Raimi on Channel 4, and Sam Raimi, who directed The Evil Dead, that started making it as a teenager, and within the show not only showed you them making the film as teenagers, but also the films that he'd made on Super 8. So that was just the real light bulb thing of seeing also somebody that wasn't from Hollywood. That was in the woods in Michigan making a horror film. And then that was the point, there was a really galvanizing thing of my parents had given me and my brother a secondhand Super 8 camera. It was a 2 birthdays and 2 Christmases present. It was like a joint birthday and Christmas present for me and my brother. And because I'd just seen the show, it was like, this is what we're going to do. And so I just started making. I went to secondary school in Somerset. At a comprehensive called the Blue School. I always have to say comprehensive because Blue School sounds really posh. It wasn't. But I started making like shorts with my friends on Super 8, and all the things that you just like learn through doing it. Just the trial and error of Super 8 film is quite expensive, and so I had to work like a Saturday job to just every reel of Super 8 film was like £30. And so, when you're like 14, that's a lot of money. So, you would then be really sparing in the way that you would shoot because you only had 2 reels, that kind of thing. So I just started making things at school with my school friends, and that was kind of how it just started, just making, just learning by doing, basically.
But it was it was more difficult then than it is today to sort of start making these sort of home movies. I mean, for example, you can get a phone out, you can sort of you can make a movie at home by yourself with your phone, and then you can upload that on YouTube, and you can sort of gain some notoriety from that. Do you think it's easier now?
Oh, yeah.
For someone starting out, because you didn't have the formal film education, did you?
No.
In the way that a lot of people, which is valuable, but do you feel that that gave you an also kind of a different way of approaching the craft than maybe you would have had you had the film education?
Well, this was even before like college time was. This is when I was in like the end of school and at the start of sixth form. And I didn't have video cameras were around, but we didn't have one. We couldn't afford one. Mm-hmm. But then I did a Super 8 short, which won a competition on Going Live. Some of the older people here will remember.
What the plot to that was? Or
it was because it was a comic relief, 1991. So I was, I think, 16, about to turn 17. And it was you had to make a film about one of Comic Relief's causes. And I did something about the fact there wasn't enough disabled wheelchair access at cinemas. So I did a little animation film in my bedroom, which took like 2 nights. I stayed up all night. I remember it was the night that the Gulf War broke out because it was on the TV all night. I remember that specifically because that was what was the soundtrack to me making this thing was like the Gulf War starting. And it won on the show. So I was on BBC TV when I was like 17. Dressed very similar, actually. So the thing that I won was a video camera. Yeah. And then that's something I previously couldn't have afforded. And then when I had the video camera, then it was really off to the races. And then my grades at school really started to suffer because I was basically just like shooting films the entire time at school, every free period, after school, like so just making these little kind of mini epics with this little handycam. So I just like learned through that. And the thing is that, again, you didn't have the internet at your fingertips where you can a lot of people can learn everything through YouTube tutorials. And wasn't like there was a lot of film books. There were no film books in the library at school, very, very few in the library in town. So you just kind of learned by doing it. And it would be the thing of you would watch films that you liked and then you would try and figure out, how do you do that shot? How do you do that shot without a crane? How do you do that shot without a Steadicam? I probably didn't even know what a Steadicam was, but you're just trying to figure it out on your own. And then I basically, after sixth form, I tried to get into some of the big film schools in the UK and got turned down by nearly all of them. And I went to Bournemouth, which has a good film and TV course, but I didn't get on. And they said, why don't you do like the National Diploma, which was like a 2-year sort of foundation-y sort of course. And they said, do that for 2 years and then reapply. So I went to Bournemouth and I did that for 2 years and sort of wasn't on the course, but kind of used the facilities, even though Bournemouth is like, obviously it's by the beach. So come like the spring and summer terms, the campus is deserted.
Okay.
Like everybody has gone down to the beach. The attendance, as soon as the weather gets good, is terrible. But as you can see, I've never seen the sun. So I was like, I'm going to get into that edit. I knew where the edit suite was, and I knew the guy who had the key.
Okay.
And it was like, Nigel, I need the key this weekend. And I would basically just stay in the edit all weekend and just be editing, learning how to edit on my own. And just drinking vending machine coffee, eating 1 Snickers a day. And So that was sort of, I learned to do stuff there. And then I reapplied for the course, got turned down again. And at that point, I was like, fuck this. I'm going to go off and make a movie. So it's sort of inspired by not just like The Evil Dead, but Peter Jackson making Bad Taste, Robert Rodriguez making El Mariachi. It was
is this Fistful of Fingers?
Yeah.
You're talking about, yeah.
So that summer that I didn't get onto the course, that summer, me and my school friends and a bunch of people from my course and some people from London made like a very, very low budget 16mm movie in Somerset, and we shot for like 20 days. We shot until we ran out of money. We actually shot, we didn't have any days off. We shot for sort of 20 days straight, and then it was like we shot until we ran out of money. So that, and then I moved to London to edit it, very, very cheaply. And then I had to sort of, I was signing on in London, and, so it was this strange thing of like, by chance, one of the producers of the movie, it was his first thing, he used to work at the post-production department at Pinewood. And he got us, not an edit suite, but a broom cupboard at Pinewood. But also, we weren't supposed to be there. We weren't officially there. We got passes, but we were basically there, not illegally, but we weren't supposed to be there.
Okay.
There was no fistful of fingers on the door. Sure. We were in the broom cupboard editing this movie, and my editor, Giles, who didn't live in London, was living in Bournemouth, he slept in the edit. And that we couldn't afford an assistant editor, so I was the assistant editor. And I would be coming from Ealing, and it's that thing is like, it's my first movie and we're editing at Pinewood Studios. But of course, what that means is like, I get the train to Uxbridge, and then I get a bus, and then I walk 2 miles to Pinewood.
How many of you were there, like, on that team making that film?
Editing?
Yeah.
Like me and the editor. That was it. I was the assistant editor. That was it. And, it's also that thing where it's like you think how far you've come is that thing is like, I edited my first film at Pinewood, but also I never had any money for lunch. Yeah. Like, it was like we could afford an apple or like some chips, and that was it. And and then maybe like one coffee a day.
But you look back on those days quite fondly now.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
Whenever I go back to Pinewood, I try and find that broom cupboard. But so it was a thing where, again, it was that thing where it's in a strange way, it's all like powered along by complete, like the energy of just like doing it, but also there's that kind of confidence that you have when you're younger that's naivety. Like, you don't know the word no because you don't know what could go wrong. And as you get older, you get more weighed down by the why nots, And so that's the thing, is I think about that, and it's something that the movie is really goofy and really silly, and it's not like it's not my best effort. But it's that weird thing, is I think if I'd have thought about it for more than a second, the whole thing would have collapsed. Do you know what I mean? It was just something that was it was like, we're just gonna force this thing to happen.
Yeah.
And it's sort of a miracle that it did. But there was a moment when I was editing it where I realized that the film was like not good enough.
Okay.
And I had a real kind of just existential crisis of that, oh no, I've made a film, and it's...
Well, do you remember when you first put the film out there, and kind of like what the reactions were like when it first came out, and kind of then how that then led on to you doing Asylum, and then...
Well, what happened was, it did, the crazy thing is that it was a very, very low budget film. The entire thing cost $21,000, the entire thing. And a distributor, nobody wanted to pick it up. One distributor, Blue Dolphin, like an independent distributor, and there was one print, and they wanted to put it out, and they put it out at the Prince Charles. And we did a couple of festivals. We were at the Edinburgh Film Festival, and it came out in 1995. It came out the same weekend as GoldenEye. And I remember that because it's at the Prince Charles Cinema, and, the Prince Charles at that time, the tickets were like £2. But I remember being in the Prince Charles, and I remember looking across Leicester Square and seeing an enormous line.
And thinking it was...
Around the... No, I didn't think it was for me. Oh, my God. No, I just thinking But one of the things, again, really naively, and this is something that's interesting, I thought really naively that because it was a film that only cost 21 grand, that critics would take that into account.
Okay.
When reviewing it alongside GoldenEye. No, they don't. And then I kind of thought... And then, some people would give us a... It was that funny thing where, It was a really weird thing. The other thing I remember really vividly about that period is that, again, I had like no money. I was signing on at the time, and I could sort of afford, I was doing Q&As that weekend at the Prince Charles, and I could sort of afford the travel card to get into town. But I couldn't afford anything else. Like, I couldn't afford dinner, so I would be doing these Q&As. And then during the film, because I couldn't watch it, because I found it too difficult to watch, I would just be wandering around, looking in the windows of Chinese restaurants in Chinatown, like I was Oliver Twist or something. And, but I remember also that, like, it was a real, like, Russian roulette of, like, back then is like looking at the papers to see if there's a review of the film. Yeah. And being in the newsagent and flicking through. And it was like being, like, finding the golden ticket in Willy Wonka. It's like you look through and it's like, oh, there's a review. Oh, it's a bad one. Oh, there's a good one. But it was a real sort of high and low thing, because it's like Alexander Walker, who was like the big film critic at the Evening Standard, he like gave it like a rave review, which was sort of shocking to us. Although he said it was directed by the lead actor and not me, which was like just it literally, Graham Lowe was the lead actor. It said, we should look out for the director Graham Lowe in the future. I'm like, fucking hell.
It's kind of a compliment.
But it was that thing. Alexander Walker had given it a great review. Time Out had given it a good review. Empire Magazine, 1 star. Yeah. And it's that thing where, as somebody who'd read every single issue of Empire, I'm like, God damn it. Like, you got me. So it was like such a strange, and it was such a thing. I think people, you know this, is that with anybody who's like made a film or is in a band, people assume that like you've made it. What they don't know is that like I have like no cash. Yeah. This is a true story. There was a magazine that used to be like another magazine that was like Time Out called What's On in London. And I was in like a newsagent in Camden, and I had no money. And in What's On in London, they had a great review of Fist of the Fingers. And I apologize, I shoplifted the magazine. Because I really wanted this magazine with the review. I had no money.
Do you still have it today as well? You still got it somewhere?
I don't, but what I should do is just go back to that newsagent and just drop 20 quid on the counter and walk out and say nothing. But there was that thing that's so strange where it's like this kind of thing is like, oh, I guess like I'm a film director. And also it was that crazy thing. It had a good review in Variety, but it didn't occur to me then, because I had no cash, is that in these days, people go out and make studio deals on the basis of a short, on the basis of a TikTok. I had a good review in Variety, and it never once occurred to me to like, because the thing is, in this day and age, you could go and say, hey, I've got this comedy, and it's in the West End, and there's a good review in Variety. Like, it just didn't occur to me. So I kind of was just, and also it's because I wasn't that proud of the movie as well. So I was kind of conflicted about it, even though I was happy that people had seen it. Then how it led into getting more work is that some people went to see it at the Prince Charles. 2 of those people were Matt Lucas and David Walliams, who had been at Edinburgh at the time and been kind of a hit at Edinburgh, and were doing a sketch show on the Paramount Comedy Channel, which is now Comedy Central, which at that time used to have offices in Rathbone Place and a little studio. And they hired me, age 21, to do their first sketch show. So it was that thing where I always think that doing TV at that very young age, that was like going to college.
Yeah, what was that transition like from, you just made your first debut feature film and now suddenly you're making a TV series, Asylum, we're talking about?
No, Mash and Peas came first. Asylum was the second one, but it came immediately after this. Yeah. But here's the crazy thing, and this is where you feel like, okay, I knew at the time that I was really lucky. I kept pinching myself, and it's something you always got to remind yourself is like, I can't believe that this is my job. I'm doing these like wild, silly sketches with these guys. But then also, between that show and Asylum, it starred Matt Lucas, David Walliams, Jessica Hines, Julian Barrett, Bill Bailey, Simon Pegg, like just all of like the next generation coming through. So in that year, like when I was 21, or maybe 21 turning 22, I was working with all of these people who were going to be the next generation. And so it was amazing. I mean, it's like all those shows were super low budget, but it was that thing where you're kind of like learning on the job. And most of the crew were like young as well. Then I sort of got poached to do stuff at the BBC. First by Alexei Sayle as a sketch. He did a sketch show in 1997, and I directed the whole thing. And I did Murder Most Horrid with Dawn French. and I did a whole series of Bill Bailey, and then I did like the French and Saunders Christmas special, the Titanic one. If you ever saw the Titanic, I directed that at age 24, which is what was really crazy. And I look back at it now, like sort of is, you know, there are a number of things. Is that doing something at the Paramount Comedy Channel with people of the same age was different. But then being at the BBC when you were really young is that some people are on your side and some people kind of are waiting for you to fail because they just can't understand why a 23-year-old is directing. And in a strange way, when they found out that it wasn't a case of nepotism, I think weirdly they would have accepted it more.
They would have preferred it.
They would have preferred it if I was the Director General's son.
Yeah, it would have made more sense.
But when they found out that I was nobody, they were like, and I hadn't even been to film school, there's like, what the fuck is this guy doing directing us? So it was one of the reasons I grew a beard to look a bit older.
Okay.
I remember like Alexei Sayle, who I really liked actually, but I remember one time I was directing, and I used to like what I used to wear in those days was like, I used to sort of dress at Camden Market. So I used to wear like a long sleeve Cat in the Hat, like sweatshirt. I remember Alexei Sayle was sitting watching me direct and he just said, he goes, Edgar, we have to get you some adult clothes. So that was a real like crazy experience. And it kind of culminated in French and Saunders, the Christmas special, because it's like, it's not just them. It's like Helen Mirren is in it, Joanna Lumley is in it, Adrian Edmondson is in it, and it's just like insane. The thing after that was then Spaced, and that felt like I'd worked with Simon and Jess on Asylum. They, during the time that I'd been at the BBC, which had been like 2 years, they were writing Spaced during that period, and they'd always said, Edgar should direct this. So I'd been involved in it early on, and then in early '99, we shot it. So I was still like 24 when we shot the first series of Spaced. Wow. And that was an amazing sort of thing because suddenly, after having been at the BBC and having a good experience, but also you're working with a lot of veterans, some of whom are on your side and some of whom are not on your side. With Spaced, it was generally like a younger cast. Like most of the main actors are in their 20s. And mostly like younger crew. And then a lot of people on the show that I still work with to this day, you know, so it was an amazing experience doing that show, you know?
Yeah, I mean, we have a clip actually from Spaced, which kind of shows how, like, that young group you guys got together and you were able to be creative with the kind of scenes you were producing.
Yeah.
And you guys, I'm sure a lot of people who have seen this scene, it's the famous gun fight in the alleyway.
Oh. What? You know what?
He who laughs last, laughs longest.
What do you think we should do?
Let him have it.
Minicab?
Yes, please! Step on it!
I mean, I think, you know, I think to a lot of younger filmmakers, and it's a really good example of what you can do with a lower budget, and how you can make something funny, but also pull off that kind of scene with, and it has an action.
I feel bad. I'm like crying because the bit where he does the thing on the wall, like that Alex Noodle making like the blood go over the thing always like cracks me up. No, I mean it was amazing. Like I've gone a bit teary watching that. I don't know why. Yeah, no, I mean the thing that's amazing is that thing where it's like you don't have anything except the camera and the actors. There's no like props in that scene. There's the car, and we're in like an alley in Camden by the Camden Tub. But you know, that's the fun of that. Is just like it's just like imagination. You know, I mean, what's amazing is like the editor of that episode, Paul Matchless, who was the online editor for the first series, and then the second series, he took over and edited. And that was, I think that's the first episode that we ever edited in full together, or maybe it was the second one. But you know, I've worked with him ever since he like, you know, won the BAFTA for Baby Driver, and it's like, that's what we were doing like 22 years ago. It's crazy. So, I mean, it's such a sort of happy time doing that, because also it was like, let me wipe away my tears, I'm sorry. It was also at a budget level, that show, where it was kind of under the radar, as in it didn't cost that much, that we never really got any notes from the network at all. I mean, God knows whether that would happen now. I don't believe it would. But Channel 4 would like, it's sort of almost like the best kind of, you know, people to work for, because there was not really any notes.
Were they not looking over your shoulder?
No.
You know.
They were never on set. And they didn't watch rushes, you just handed in. I mean, the main thing was like, because it's on a commercial TV, it couldn't be longer than 26.5 minutes. And if it was, you were going to lose your trailer for next week. So I think one of the episodes of Space is like 29 minutes long. And they were like, so they say, well, you can't have a trailer. But it was like literally the only note you would get, and forgive the swearing, but the only note was to say, you know, you can only say fuck twice and you can't say cunt. and that was basically... I think that rule doesn't exist anymore. Definitely not the only having 2 fucks. But it's also the crazy thing is that it was like we were sort of making this network Friday night show. The first series went out in between Friends and Frasier on like a Friday night. It would always lose all of like Friends lead in. But it was just sort of like wild that like they would give it that platform. I mean, you know, like there's still a lot of great comedy being made, but it is that thing where I feel so fortunate that we came in at a time when, like a show like that, a low budget show would be put out at 9:30 at night on a Friday. It's like crazy, you know.
By the time you got to Shaun of the Dead, obviously you did Shaun of the Dead after Space, then that was kind of your big breakout directorial movie. But by the time you got to Shaun of the Dead, do you feel like you had sort of figured out what kind of filmmaker you were by then, and you had more of an understanding of how to create a film more efficiently, as in, we have a clip from Hot Fuzz. I know it's not Shaun of the Dead. We have a Hot Fuzz clip. But I think what that film shares with Shaun of the Dead is incredible editing. And can we put the Hot Fuzz clip on? And you'll see this one scene, which it's a scene where a character's moving from one place to another. And instead of it being a scene where there's a car driving, there's some music, and you see New York City, it's a scene which you've done really quite cleverly to show the passage of time, and I think it's a great scene.
Frank again. One other thing about your cottage. It's not ready.
Yeah, I think the difference is like, I obviously, when I was doing TV stuff, I had learned how to do what I wanted to do. And the biggest thing was like, when I made Fist of the Fingers, you know, we didn't have a video assist or anything. So it's like, and also, you know, we had like maybe a 2-to-1 ratio where at max you got 3 takes. Usually maybe you got 2 takes. So, you don't have like, you also didn't have dailies. So with that movie, it's like when we got back to edit it, we're watching what we shot for the first time. We weren't seeing it on the day. We weren't seeing it during the shoot. And then the thing is that the difficult thing with that movie is kind of pertinent to this, is that there was no coverage to pace the movie. Because if you don't have like the angles or the coverage, you can't necessarily make it any longer or shorter. It is what it is. And a lot of Fistful of Fingers is like, this is the scene and this is the only shot we have of this. By the time it came to do Shaun, and having done Space, is like I knew how to edit as well, even though I didn't actually officially edit much of the time, although I have done sometimes, is that I knew how to shoot for the edit. And I knew what I needed to put a sequence together. And so in a way you become more efficient doing that because it's like, I know exactly what we need to make the scene work. So it was by the time that Shaun came around, I mean, it wasn't something that it kind of happened like that. It actually, that was another period of like, 2 or 3 years of getting it going. And Spaced wasn't that big a hit that everybody flung their doors open. A lot of people said no to Shaun of the Dead. And it was Working Title who were the people that eventually sort of, gave us the go-ahead. But what's amazing is that I wasn't working off, usually if you've made a first film, then you're always going to be, that's always got to be your calling card. And the great thing that I had in doing all this TV is that nobody involved in Shaun of the Dead had even seen Fistful of Fingers. Like, Working Title had never seen it. Simon and Nick had never seen it. They were all just going off the back of like, he did the show called Spaced, and they want to do a movie that's in the sort of like Spaced. So people who had seen the show could sort of understand that. So I think then, that's something I just like. I think it's maybe just having been through the experience of making a first film where I just had no coverage and no way to re-edit the movie, that I've almost been overcompensating ever since to be able to sort of pace it. I mean, that sequence is interesting because it's all like told in close-ups. But, a lot of that, even on Hot Fuzz, we would do those, a lot of those shots were done during camera tests.
Okay.
Like, so it's before you've started shooting as a way of like, kind of like, hey, this little sequence that's on the screen for like 45 seconds has like 35 shots in it. So it's like, let's do some camera tests, and then we'll go out with Simon. So he's actually out on the real train, like, out of like Paddington and back, and we shot that kind of like in the sort of prep period, just as a way of. It's also quite a good thing to do something small with just one actor, where before the first day of the shoot, you actually shot a little bit of the film, and you've got to know the crew, everybody's names now, everybody's like has worked together before day one. I always try and do something like that. You do like a little bit of something so that like the first day isn't the first day, if that makes sense. Yeah. And that was a good example of that. Lots of those shots were done before the first day of the shoot.
Are you quite strict with your filmmaking, actually? Like, how important is it everyone sticks to what you storyboard? Or do you leave a sort of like freedom for people to be able to do what they want on screen as well? Well,
you have great actors that will bring a different energy to it. I mean, I storyboard everything, not in a dictatorial way of like, treating the actors like cattle, more in terms of just efficiency. Like, I remember in like, when I was making Hot Fuzz, Paddy Considine, who I love working with him, I've worked with him, several times. But I remember one day he sort of said, I said, so you guys are going to stand here. They're in a graveyard. I said, you guys are going to stand here. And Paddy said, what about if we're over here? And I said, well, we have gravestones here, and there are no gravestones here, so I'd like you to stand here. So sometimes it's just like, it's just efficiency. Yeah. It's like, this is where we're looking, this is the shot. And obviously if like actors, especially in a comedy, if they kind of have something that, what you're not just shooting the drawings that you've done, it has to come alive, and, and there will be things that you won't expect that will be brilliant. And there will be things where you've designed it in such a way, and then when you see it, it's not quite how you imagined it, and then you're trying to figure out how to make it better. So it's sort of, but I tend to use like storyboards to everything, really just as a way of getting through an ambitious schedule. So it's sort of the opposite to, a Robert Altman approach, where like he would show up and sort of say, well, let's see what happens. Let's just start shooting and see what happens. It is the exact opposite of that, where it is very sort of like you kind of sort of just kind of worked out every single shot. But then also, I think it's something that if you include the crew and the actors in that, so there's total transparency, then actually everybody knows what they're doing. And then, then it is the actors are bringing the life to it, as in the motion and stuff. So it's always like sort of that there's, you can plan and plan and plan, and it's a good thing to just have up your sleeve if it's like, if you're trying to make something that looks more expensive than it is, then it's good to have like a shopping list.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? If you don't have like, if you're trying to, I mean, I think probably Hot Fuzz, I'm not, being immodest, but I think it probably looks twice as expensive as it is. But that's because like it's all like planned out. We sort of know what we're doing, and then we've rehearsed it before. That's the other key thing. I always like to rehearse before you get on set. So you've done like theatrical rehearsals, especially with something like Shaun of the Dead, where you could kind of rehearse the whole thing like a play, because there are several scenes where it's 5 actors in one location. And we would rehearse like Shaun like it was a play. But that's good because you're saving time on the day where there's not really that much discussion about what the scene means and what the tone is and what the motivation is. All of that's been done before, Can
you tell me, by the time you got to Baby Driver, there were new challenges because you were using music in your editing as well. Can you tell me about how the idea to do that was quite an inventive idea when it first came out? Did it take you 10 years to finally put the idea for Baby Driver on screen? Is that correct?
It's a bit of both. It was actually more than that. I'd done actually, even before Shaun of the Dead, I'd done this music video in 2002, After Spaced, which was, I guess it was like a dry run for Baby Driver. Or more what happened is that I'd always had this idea for Baby Driver as far back as when I did Fistful of Fingers. And the idea was, at first it was an idea of what if you had a car chase film that was entirely set to music. And then it changed to, what if the character in it is listening to the music and he can't function without the music playing? And I had this idea in like 1995. But back then, where it's like I'm making Fistful of Fingers and I'm living in Wood Green, it's like the idea of you knew that a car chase film wasn't going to exist in the States, and it wasn't going to be my first film. It was just too ambitious. So I sort of just sat on it. And then I did this music video in 2002 with Noel Fielding in it, playing essentially the baby part, where I did this music video based around the first scene. And I felt, and the only reason I used it was because I didn't have a better idea. And then I felt really dumb, because I felt like, why did I use this good idea on this music video? What an idiot. Way, way later, I started writing the script. And it was I started writing it in 2010 after Scott Pilgrim. And then we made it in 2016. So it took sort of 5 years from writing it. But in that time, what was interesting is that I always had this
idea.
I had this, not just the idea, but I had the kind of like, the post-dated like concept. So it was this funny thing when Baby Driver was coming out, there'd be some people who were saying like, isn't this just a rip-off of Drive? And I'd be like, well, let me show you my 2002 video, which is basically exactly the same thing. So that was the thing, is I had this video, and then it was something, so there was that thing in terms of proposing it to a studio. It's very difficult to write that film on paper. That was really tough. But it helped that there was this one proof of concept, is like, hey, this is sort of what it's going to be like.
So when you were figuring out the songs for that film, what comes first? Do you listen to a song and then you decide, okay, I can visualize a scene from that song?
Yeah.
Or is it, so that's how it begins, as opposed to writing a scene and finding the correct track?
It's a bit of both. It's like the big sequences, I had the idea.
Yeah.
Like, I know I want to do, like, I think, I want to do the opening sequence to Bell Bottoms by the John Spencer Blues Explosion. Okay, I want to do a shootout to this particular cover version of Tequila. Or I want to do... So you start to work out the big bits. And then when I was writing, because in the film, he's listening to a song in every scene, then when I would write that scene, or come to write a scene where it's like, okay, he's in the diner and he meets Deborah for the first time, I would figure out how long the scene was going to be, and then I would find... This is back when iTunes was much more user-friendly. I'd literally like put all the songs that I had on my library in duration order, and then look at all the ones that were like 2 minutes long, and just like listen to the 2-minute songs. And they go, this is it, the Beach Boys.
Well, I think,
and then write the scene around that song.
Okay. Well, we actually have the opening scene from Baby Drive to show you now.
Snowden.
That's such a cool film, I think. And is it true? I mean, probably the answer is a rumor going around. Is it true there's going to be a Baby Driver 2?
Well, I've written something. It's actually sort of existed for a while, so potentially, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Can't get any more from you.
I'm very, very superstitious.
But I think what that film also displayed is that you've also got, would you say, just as much of an interest in music, pop music, as you do in cinema as well? And I feel like you tried to cross over quite a few times. I mean, for sure, like Last Night in Soho and Scott Pilgrim.
I think a lot of my favourite sequences in films are sort of a collision between music and visuals. So it is that thing. It's like sort of there's like full-on musicals that I love, like the Busby Berkeley or sort of Gene Kelly, Stanley Donen stuff. Or even something like 2001 is like a movie like that, where it's like the entire thing is powered along by classical music, or what Stanley Kubrick did in that, and Clockwork Orange, where it's like it's not a musical, but it's very driven by existing music. So I always like things like that, where and I think it's always sort of been in there. Space, there was a lot of that. One of the big scenes in Shaun of the Dead is the Queen scene, where it's all like sort of powered along by one Queen song. So it's always the idea of like, I guess Baby Driver is like, well, what if what if like you had a film where like all the scenes are like the Queen scene, and it's definitely ambitious, because you kind of like you're setting up a very ambitious idea, and you kind of have to keep the ball in the air. But also, what was interesting with Baby Driver is because the songs are set, and I'd written them into the scripts, and then we cleared them before we started shooting. And as such, it does mean that you're reverse engineering things in a way. Like most action films, like a big sort of Michael Bay, Tony Scott approach, R.I.P. Tony Scott, but like they would shoot 15 cameras and they would shoot tons of amazing like stunts, and then they'd edit it. But with Baby Driver, it's like this song is like 2.5 minutes long. The scene is not going to get any longer than that. So with the stunt guys, it was an interesting puzzle for them, because we're always reverse engineering the action into the song, which would mean that you can make it quite precise. It didn't make it easier, but it meant that there was less waste. It wasn't like there's tons of deleted scenes in Baby Driver, because it is what it is. It's as long as the song,
Mm-hmm. And then obviously, more recently, you've done Last Night in Soho, which focuses a lot on 1960s music. And then you also made a fantastic documentary on the Sparks Brothers. And the great thing about that film is that you get to interact a lot with these great musicians like Flea, and interview them about music, and specifically the Sparks Brothers. Do you feel like while making that documentary, you also learned a little bit about the filmmaking process from is there like a crossover between the filmmaking process and the music creating process as well that you learned or from that experience?
I mean, I made Last Night in Soho and the Sparks Brothers at the same time. And there was a point then during the pandemic where we were sort of editing the two things at the same time. And the Sparks documentary was just like a pure passion project. And I hadn't necessarily planned to make a documentary, but I'd met Sparks in Los Angeles, and I was a big fan of theirs. And having met them and knowing what they were like in person, I started to say to my friends, like, hey, somebody should do a documentary about Sparks. And I kept just saying it to friends, and then it was Phil Lord, the director. We were actually at a Sparks gig, and I said to him, somebody should do a documentary about Sparks. And he goes, you should do the documentary on Sparks. And I think because it was him, he like goaded me into it, and I said, yes, I will. And so I asked him that night. So it was an amazing process, because also with a documentary, you're giving yourself over to their story, and it's like, you can have control to a certain extent, but you're also kind of letting it happen. And also with them, and if you've seen the documentary, it's like I interview like 80 people, because they're brilliant interviewees, but also there's lots of things that they would never say about themselves. They're very modest, and also they just kind of like, they're things that they won't be drawn on, so you sort of need somebody else to say it for them. And then the amazing thing with them is, because they've been going for like 6 decades, is that the people that they have worked with, inspired, been part of the band, been fans and then become musical artists, just span from like, you know, the late 60s to now, and it was just incredible. So it was an amazing experience doing that, and I really enjoyed it. And I did all the interviews myself, so it was something where I sort of jumped into... I had a lot of people who worked on the crew who'd done great documentaries, so I definitely brought in a lot of ringers to help me. But it was such an amazing experience doing it.
Yeah, I mean, do you think it's important to keep, you know, that was your first documentary, and then you've also done TV series, and obviously something like Baby Driver, and even Scott Pilgrim to some extent, you know, is quite inventive in its own way. Do you think it's important to, as a filmmaker, that you need to keep sort of challenging yourself with new styles of cinema, testing things out?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got to go into something being shit scared about something.
Okay.
That you don't really, like, know what you're doing. You want to learn something new. I think the point where you go into work sort of complacent and like, oh yeah, I know how to do this, then that's not the way to, like, make good movies, you know? You can't go in thinking that you know everything. So you learn, you know, on every film something new. It's like I hadn't really done a car chase before Baby Driver. You know, Scott Pilgrim has tons of like martial arts scenes and big music performance scenes. I hadn't really done that before. So it's just like, it's great. You're just like, and you're bringing in, you know, the other thing is it is all about teamwork, and you're working with the most like amazing people in their field in different movies, and you want to learn from them. So it is a thing where you're, you know, and I hope this, at the moment, I'm always learning with every movie, and I hope that never stops. You don't want, like I said, you don't want to come in thinking that you know everything, because that's sort of like the path to disaster, I think.
We actually have a clip from the Sparks Brothers, actually. I mean, it's a fantastic film if anyone hasn't seen it.
Something that's always kind of confounded me in popular music is people's inability to take humor seriously. And I think that's one of the things, like, why a band like Sparks isn't as big as the biggest bands in the world. Because they're fucking funny.
You had sense, you had style, you had cash galore.
A lot of critics and some fans sometimes denigrate bands that show their sense of humor. Like, oh, it's a comedy band, it's a joke band. I just don't get that. I don't know why it has to be so stinking serious.
You got a built-in seat that makes you look your feet, you know that looks.
I thought it was going to be a smash hit album because it was so different, and anyone could see that we spent hours of work and put detail in it, and the songs were so great, and Russell's singing was amazing. The world just didn't agree with us, you know. It did well, but not that well.
We were so irate at just lack of acceptance for what we thought was an amazing album that we were seriously considering recording Louie Louie as our next single, you know, just for spite.
About to release their album from their, the first single from their 26th album on tomorrow.
Amazing.
Crazy.
Congratulations, Sparks.
It's amazing.
I know you're also, you know, you're quite keen also to always share kind of what you know, what you've learned so far, you know, as a filmmaker. I know you've done a BBC Maestro as well. And I wanted to end on a note which was, just before we go to questions, which is, you know, I know there's a lot of young filmmakers here. Is there a piece of advice that you could give a filmmaker that you feel would be valuable to them on the beginning of their journey?
I think the main thing for me is that, like, because the job is so hard, like, it has to come from a place of passion, and it has to come from a place of sincerity. So I always just think the thing is, and this might sound like stating the obvious, is like, make the film that you want to see. You know, it's like, make the film that you want to make, not the film that you think you ought to make. Because I think when people make things in a cynical way of like, oh, this genre is hot now, let's do this, and they're not really that invested in it, you can tell, you know? So, and I think that there's a lot of films that you see where, like, people are sort of just using a genre as, like, just a stepping stone, but there isn't the actual inherent passion for that subject matter. So I've always, like, approached everything that I do with, like, I really love what I'm doing, because you're going to spend 2-3 years or more of your life doing it. So if you're going to make a Sparks documentary, you better really love Sparks.
Yeah.
Or if you want to make a car chase movie, you're going to really want to do it because it's going to be really, really hard. And so I think that's the thing, is I think just sort of, it all ties in with the thing of like, to go with your gut in terms of like what you think works, but also what you really want to do. I mean, I always try to make the movies as like, that I'm the audience member, is that if I didn't make this movie, I would be first in line to see it. I think if you've kind of lost that like you're not the perfect audience member for your film, I'm not sure what you're doing anymore, you know?
Thank you, Edgar, so much. Thanks for...
No worries. Thank you. Thank you very much.